Welcome to the AI in Manufacturing podcast here on Industry 4.0 TV. I'm your host, Kudzai Manditereza. And in this episode, we're going to discuss how to optimize AI inference for agentic operations in manufacturing. And my guest on this episode to help us unpack this is Kelvin Cooper, who is the co-founder and CEO of Neurometric.ai. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us on this show today. Really appreciate it. Welcome.
Thank you for having me on. This is an exciting topic.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, really, looking forward to dive in more into this with you today. So before we get started, could you maybe start by introducing yourself to our audience? Tell us a bit more about your background and more about Neurometric AI.
Yeah, absolutely. So at Neurometric, we're on a mission to make intelligence essentially free. And so we build inference orchestration and SLMs, so small language models, for faster, cheaper, and more accurate AI systems. I also see this from several angles. I'm a director at Pilot Wave Holdings, which is a private equity firm that's AI native, doing AI rollups, founded by the former chief data science officer of JP Morgan. And so we're acquiring companies, industrial businesses, and leading AI transformation. I'm also leading some research at the Milken Institute on policy to meet the AI industrial challenge here in America. By way of background, I started my career in venture capital, helped raise a fund in the Midwest. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. We were investing in early stage technology businesses. This was 10 years ago, across several thematic areas. Also helped build what was called the Smart City Accelerator, which was backed by NCT Ventures, the firm I was at, and American Electric Power, one of our LPs. And this Smart Cities Accelerator even then was investing in automation and our industrial base. But now we're experiencing the biggest transformation in our lifetimes technologically, which is AI. And it's going to impact every industry, right? It's like one of those things where at first with the internet, you had internet businesses, but now every company is on the internet. You have to be. This is the same with AI. AI is going to touch every workflow, every business, and every aspect of our lives.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And that kind of like was the reason why we, started more on this AI in manufacturing podcast journey, as it were, to kind of like really address this very fact that the fact that AI is going to play a central role in manufacturing is no longer really in question. So really support, helping manufacturing leaders to understand where they stand right now, what can they do right now, what are the possibilities right now, and be able to sort of like prepare themselves for the future. And to get us started here, there's a state that keeps coming up almost in every conversation that I have here, which is really about scaling, moving from pilot to production with AI. So there are many different figures that I've seen. So sometimes you get a number that says 95% of AI proof of concept never make it to production. And I guess maybe it depends really on the industry, but when it comes to manufacturing, it is really those high percentage numbers of AI proof of concept that never make it out of production. So I want to kind of like start our conversation here by getting your take on what do you think is that gap that makes it so that there's huge divide between AI experimentation and actually production deployment.
Yeah, I think we can learn a lot from the startup world. So after my time in venture, I started a tech company, a consumer fintech business, and learned a lot. We raised a $10 million seed round from a multi-stage venture firm. And so I had a number of years to really move from the investing side to being an operator and executing. There's not a lot of good content out there or lessons around going from 0 to 1. experimenting and shipping something useful. And so a lot of things I found in myself and people I'd hire is you have to really unlearn product management and different strategies that are taught at big companies or even in startup accelerators. It's just plain wrong. And it wasn't until a few years in where we completely threw out that playbook and adopted a more Silicon Valley style of executing that we really started to make big progress. And here's what I'd say that's true, not just in manufacturing organizations, but in most companies. You have a mindset of making decision by committee. You're trying to risk mitigate too much. Here's a takeaway. Most doors are two-way doors, meaning you can ship and then you can scale something back. We tend to overestimate risk associated with getting something wrong and underestimate the opportunity of getting something right. And so the approach needs to change often. People are like, let's do a pilot. It needs to have this impact. What success look like, right? But when you're experimenting, and this is even true in venture, many of the worst VCs are analyzing your deck and your model and your product today at the seed stage and trying to understand if you're right or wrong. This is not good. The best VCs are trying to understand how you think. What they're really validating is you and your team as the product. And so, how's that translate to a business? The pilot is really the pod you're building, right? That might be a few technologists, project manager, or product designer, and the KPI is really shipping something complete as soon as possible, you know, and then assuming that it's going to fail, right? What you're building is a feedback loop. It's like, can we build, ship, interact with the market, learn, adjust? And that flywheel is what you're building. The problem is that you think the pilot is what you're building.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you kind of talk about shipping, do you have like a specific methodology on identifying a use case specifically for what could work, or how do you see companies, maybe industrial companies approaching that specific use case, that identification of that first use case? How do you determine where to start trialing out AI?
Well, I mean, I think some people are working from the capabilities of AI technology and moving forward from there. Another approach is to looking at what KPIs really matter to your business and working back from that to identify where you have the most opportunity for impact. But even early on, sometimes it's just better to just pick and execute and learn, right? You learn so much more by just doing. The time that it takes to sit around evaluating and analyzing use cases, spending 3 months, the whole market's moving, right? You would have learned more by just picking wrong and shipping and then iterating from there. Than you would from trying to pre-select where you're going to make the biggest impact. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit. It's not just on the shop floor. It's all across the business. If you look at Anthropic's report on theoretical impact of AI versus observed adoption, you see a lot of use case in white-collar jobs. And so pretty much anything that's a human workflow where you're sitting in front of a computer, you can take a stab at automating. This could be your accounting system. This could be purchase orders or bidding optimization or things like that. Those are great opportunities for AI implementations. But then harder stuff like automating actually manufacturing of goods is something that we can take a stab at as well. And in that regard, I'd say Southeast Asia is pretty far ahead of at least America and many countries in the West when it comes to robotics and automation. let alone next integrating AI solutions.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So I think also what I've seen, in this space is a huge experimentation when it comes to agentic AI. So I speak to a lot of startups as well on this podcast that are providing many various forms of agentic AI, whether it's co-pilot or kind of like really building a new layer within the manufacturing data stack, as it were. And I think one of the things that I see a lot really when it comes to using the large language models to power these agentic operations, it is that a lot of use cases or a lot of manufacturers, they default to maybe using this one frontier model to sort of like power all of their agentic operations. So as you mentioned, whether it's in production scheduling, it's in supply chain optimization, but these are all different tasks, as it were. They require different capabilities, as it were. So you, as a company, believe that approach where you are actually routing everything to one big model actually becomes a liability when companies try to scale. Can you sort of like unpack that for us?
Yeah, so this shift is already happening. So the mindset a year ago in the market was scaling compute, larger language models with more capabilities, leaderboards. This model released by this foundation lab or frontier lab beat this other model, right? And every company kind of starts with the same journey. Let's just get something to work. Um, and you're going to route that to a provider like Anthropic or OpenAI, and you're leveraging their large language model that has the best capabilities, and they may be exploring their family of models via API. But then as you go to scale, cost starts to be prohibitive for everybody. So at first it's like, is it accurate? Is it reliable? Then it's latency becomes the priority. Then often next it's cost. Good examples of that in the press. AT&T's CDO was just talking about how cost, when they were scaling to 8 billion tokens um, per day, that they had to really rethink their AI system. And so they built a solution for orchestration and multi-agent stack and task-specific models, and the future being many, many, many small language models that are specialized. And even as they scale to 27 billion tokens per day, they cut their cost by 90%. So the most sophisticated enterprises with the MO resources and expertise, we knew this months ago when we started the company. This is where the market's going because we're close to it. But now you're starting to see it publicly talked about that enterprises are starting to build these complicated orchestration layers where you can run an analysis on tasks and figure out what's the cheapest, most reliable solution for a task and coordinating that system. So that's where the market's headed. But until Neurometric, there really wasn't something more off the shelf that you could use. So the roadmap next will be externalization, where you see companies start to adopt an industry-wide solution.
Yeah, interesting. So there's one thing that really struck me when I was kind of like just going through your website and kind of like content materials. So you mentioned that this code that says intelligence gets headlines, but reliability determines whether AI is allowed to scale. So I know a lot of manufacturers are really under pressure to show ROI. Can you explain to us why is that distinction so critical, especially as AI moves from playing an advisory role into more decision making on the shop floor?
I mean, so we publish some stuff on our Substack, Neurometric Substack, and you can check it out on the Jagged Frontier. And it's really interesting. Different models perform better or worse to the task, at the task level, and even how you use inference time compute solutions or algorithms around the model can have a bigger impact than selecting the model itself. So it really gets complicated, and even within a model on a given task, these aren't deterministic systems, so there's a lot of variance in the output. And so in certain settings, you really need accuracy and reliability before you can scale a solution, right? And
Yes.
so the reality is, these models may be better or worse for different use cases. So I'd say just pick the low hanging fruit and execute against that. But these systems are getting better. So I'm pretty bullish on the space, obviously, and the ability for the global market of AI researchers and engineers to solve these problems.
Yeah. So when we talk about having specific or small language model that are provide the kind of reliability that you don't get from maybe a general purpose LLM, are we talking specifically about models that have been fine-tuned for a specific domain? What criteria or what really sort of like makes that reliable? Let's say, for example, in an industrial setting, where reliability means a totally different thing. So kind of like help us understand on what actually constitutes reliability when it comes to specific models.
Yeah. So with regards to task specific models and fine tuning, you really can get faster, cheaper, and more accurate performance on many things, especially where you have a lot of repetition and the ability to eval. Um, we are building this self improving system where you can use production data to improve or fine tune SLMs over time to better perform against a given task. But the key to that is specialization. So a lot of the headlines are around artificial general intelligence, trying to build these large models that are generally useful. And that's a lot harder than segmenting very, very specific tasks and then fine tuning models, distilling them down. And you don't need to know world history to handle some repetitive task, right? And so you can have a much smaller model, fewer parameters. You can have more specialization and be faster, cheaper, and more accurate.
Awesome. Yeah. So now you've developed a maturity framework that maps out how organizations progress through these different stages of AI deployment. Can you walk us through those different stages of that maturity framework to help our audience get a clear picture of exactly how those, what are the inflection points there, and then maybe also highlight in your experience, where do you see most companies get stuck within that maturity stage, within those maturity stages?
Yeah, so you can find a lot of this on our Substack, and our team and Rob dove in to write some really good content around the maturation of organizations on their journey. We touched on some of this earlier, but what you see is most people are just trying to get something to work at first. Once they do, they start to see that the bottleneck to scaling is going to be cost. Then they start to build a more complicated system over time. But not the reality is many of the listeners aren't going to have the machine learning resources to go and do that. And so you're going to need to adopt solutions that can you can hit the endpoint and we'll do the AI system orchestration for you. So identifying the small language models that work for your tasks, fine tuning them, escalating queries to the frontier model only when necessary. And this is really where the market's going.
Awesome stuff. So I mean, there's a lot of, because our audience, this is new for a lot of our audience, and not just in industrial operations, really. I think across the board, but more so in manufacturing, because as you may know, really industrial manufacturing is always led to adopt technologies for many different reasons. And I think one of the phenomenons that you also sort of spoke about in your Substack, which is great content, by the way. So I was really, enjoying reading all of that content, is this idea of catastrophic forgetting, right? I think a lot of people in manufacturing haven't heard of that, but are probably experiencing it without realizing it. Could you kind of like maybe just explain to our audience what that is, and why is it such a fundamental challenge when you're trying to operationalize AI?
I mean, to simplify it, it's really just as an AI neural network learns new tasks, it abruptly forgets how to perform on old things, right? But again, these are more concepts and challenges that your AI researchers are going to be passionate about and diving in. But as leaders, I'd say all these problems are getting solved. So wherever I've seen some people skeptical about the capability of AI or the impact that it's going to have in our businesses and in our daily lives, I think the lessons you can learn by digging into archive or reading some of these computer science papers is that there's billions of dollars in AI researchers, not just in academia, but now in venture-backed labs and large tech companies solving a lot of problems. Um, and and I think the main task for business leaders is to figure out: do you want to get left behind? Are you going to be a skeptic, or are you going to realize how quickly this technology is matriculating through the economy and how fast it's maturing? And if you're going to get left behind, or if you're going to be a market leader. I think, even as you touched on, historically, some sectors of the economy were laggards in adopting new technologies, and they were kind of protected um, because if you look at the past few decades, at least, venture was more pointed at software. We were doing mobile. It wasn't really intersecting with the hard parts of our economy, those that were like healthcare um, or defense technology. But that's changed. There are billion-dollar funds now pointed at healthcare, defense, and supply chains, and housing, and manufacturing. Some people are talking about $100 billion buyout funds to do AI rollups in manufacturing. You've got Pilot Wave and others doing AI rollups in the industrial economy. And what that means for folks, whether you're a large manufacturing business or a lower middle market company, is that there's a lot of capital entering the space directly positioned to adopt this technology.
Yep, absolutely. So I think if we were to sum up kind of like what we have been talking about thus far, it sounds to me kind of like that, the core philosophy of for your company is that the future isn't one model that knows everything, right? It's a coordinated team of models that each know their job. Can you maybe paint sort of like an overview picture, particularly for leaders in the manufacturing space, on exactly what that looks like? What does that hierarchy of models look like typically? Like
It
how?
looks like you're going to be abstracted away from caring about whether you're leveraging Anthropic or OpenAI. You're going to have an AI system that automatically selects the right model for the right tasks, optimizing for the right thing, whether that's cost, latency, or performance, and you're going to see much cheaper AI costs. So a lot of people, they start executing, then their bill goes thousands or tens of thousands or more, but costs are coming down, not just with token efficiency, but it's like the AI system that abstracts model choice away, and an explosion of open source and small language models. What that means for a leader is, I'd say, don't get caught up in the headlines with whether you're going to leverage this model provider or not. I think it's more important to just build a team that understands this stuff, and start executing and adopting AI any kind of way you can, in your business. And that success looks like a team, a pod in your organization that's shipping and learning regularly, and then they will get wins on the board, as opposed to saying, what's the right use case? I got to deliver value today. The value is building a team within your organization that can execute, build, interact with the market, and learn quickly.
So would you say that so we spoke about this idea of that leaders won't have to really worry about what's actually behind the model. So would you say that shift from, if I'm using I'm connecting directly to an Anthropic API, that shift to then bring in abstraction in between my current application and Anthropic API, would you say that would be a heavy lift when manufacturers that want to then bring that abstraction, or is it something that would be achievable?
Yeah, it can be achievable more easily than you think. Some of the customers that we're working with, it's been as simple as us running seeing the data and running a analysis on dozens of models, and saying, hey, if you shift from GPT 4.0 to Llama Maverick, you'll have 10x improvement in costs and 4x improvement in latency, and then they make the switch. It's not as difficult as you think, especially early on, but it's important to start to build, from day one, with the perspective that you need to build an AI system that doesn't have vendor lock-in. And so, some of the headlines here in America, the Department of War, and a saga with Anthropic, but the reality is you don't really need to have that kind of engagement with a model provider. You can abstract it away.
All right. So maybe
that's what AT&T and others are doing. So yeah,
absolutely. Or maybe let's kind of like really just talk more concretely about your Neurometric platform. So maybe can you give us a breakdown of Neurometric? What is the tooling that you provide, and what does that look like, and how does that work in practice?
Yeah. So last week we released the SLM marketplace, which is pretty incredible. So you can go to the website, browse different task-specific small language models, download them, or request an API key. So I'd say stay tuned there. So if you're a prosumer or alpha developer, check that out. For enterprises and early adopters, we have a few customers that we're engaging with. And I mentioned some of this earlier, but running model analysis, there's a self-service tool that they can use, or we can run that analysis for them, recommend if they were to switch to different models, what kind of benefits they would get. And we can show that on a dashboard. And what we're seeing is 10x improvement in costs and latency. And the next step there is really an end-to-end self-improving system that learns from production data and auto distills SLMs that are task specific and improves them over time. So that's what we're using. If anybody's interested in that, they can feel free to reach out, Cooper at Neurometric.ai. But if you're hands-on and you're an alpha dev, just check out our website, Neurometric.ai, and find the SLM marketplace and play with this yourself. So it's a really exciting time. We started the company last year. Everybody went full time last summer, and things have happened really quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in perhaps do you already have some example implementations that you've already, maybe some trials, some companies that are trying you out that you could share?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was mentioning earlier. Those numbers aren't hypotheticals. I mean, these are real improvements that people have seen, significant improvement in costs. And for some early on, because they're moving from successful production systems to scale next, the bottleneck for them was speed, and they were really excited about the latency improvement. And so it depends on where you're at in your journey. What's going to be most impactful for you? Is it going to be latency or cost or accuracy? But definitely SLMs are playing an important role in AI orchestration and delivering those results. So that's what we're seeing across our customer base, and happy to work with others on that as well.
Awesome. So, I mean, I think before I let you go, I just want to kind of get a sense of what the future looks like for Neurometric. So currently, I understand that companies would have to do that sort of like manual routing or that manual connection to your interface, but you've got like a stage 6 vision. I don't know if that's already possible, where you call it AI managing AI, whereby you've got an infrastructure that actually self optimizes and sort of like checks all the all the traffic and all the usage, and then from that self optimizes the routing, model selection, cost quality trade-offs. Is that something that is already there, or is it coming in the future?
This is something that's coming next, like dynamic model orchestration and a full self-improving end-to-end solution that auto distills SLMs that are task specific and use production traffic to get better over time. That's where we're heading. But the main vision is to make intelligence essentially free. So that's what we're doing. That's what we're building towards. We're getting better at it every day. But I think the main takeaway for anybody, whether that's manufacturing organizations, large or small, is that this is not a fad. This is not hype. Artificial intelligence and its impact on business and automating, whether that's back office, front office, or factory floors, is happening. And the time is now to start learning and implementing solutions in your organization.
Absolutely. So just as a tradition on this podcast here, we, just to put you on the spot, what a tradition to ask our guests to give us a prediction about where, they see things going in the next few years. So obviously things are moving quite, fast. It's really hard to say what it's going to look like in 10 years, but kind of just pick whether 3, 5, or a few months. Where do you see things, headed? As far, what does the ideal factory of the future powered by AI look like for you?
I mean, I'd say if we zoom out at the trajectory of the technology and the capital markets, I think AI is going to be a ubiquitous part of our lives over the next 5 to 10 years. I think ultimately what's going to happen is Jevons paradox applies to skilled labor. So I think some of the AI is going to take all of our jobs is overhyped, but it's definitely going to change the nature of our jobs. I think some aspects of the market are going to be challenged, like, let's say, very low thoughtfulness, repetitive tasks. Think entry-level jobs or interns, or in the field of law, you might think paralegal. That's going to be more targets, but the demand for healthcare and quality care is not going away. The demand for law and is not going away. And if you think about what is a job as a lawyer, it's not the best lawyers, it's not because you memorize the legal code and you can write contracts or copy and paste from templates. It's creative problem solving. If you think about manufacturing, jobs of today are not like they were decades ago or a century ago. If you're not sitting there just pushing a button, right? That's that's easily automatable. And so if you think about what are the structural changes in the economy that are going to persist, for several decades, it was just offshoring, get the cheapest part from the cheapest place with the cheapest labor. But that has changed. And so we moved to supply chain resilience, right? Reliability. So that's causing nearshoring and onshoring of manufacturing. And so you're not going to compete on labor. You're going to have to compete on technology and automation. And so in order to implement those solutions, those are jobs, right? And so the manufacturing plans of the future, I'd say whenever I make predictions, I think the future is now, just not evenly distributed. So if you see what's happening in Shenzhen or in America, if you see what Tesla's doing, and I think you can get some signal for what's going to happen next, with a lot of opportunities that you might be closer to.
Yeah, and then just last thing, I want to kind of get your sense on. I mean, you mentioned that you've seen a lot of fast, past transformations in China and Southeast Asia. I think you mentioned. What do you attribute that to when you compare to the rate at which things are moving in the West and maybe North America and Europe? Is it more cultural, or is it more of a supply chain issue? What do you believe is the cause for that gap?
I think it's cultural. It's resting on our laurels, believing that the future is going to look like the past and that we're going to still be relevant. It's sometimes there's a burden to being in first place. And then if you look at the data in Europe and America, it's really concerning with debt and all these things. And a lot of times the politics is really emotional and centered around empathy and all these things. Whereas if you're trying to play catch up, you're more focused on the goal, right? So I'd say we got to be careful with regulation. Yeah, we're trying to solve for things like a random consumer using a chat bot to and then for medical advice, and there's a bad outcome. But then shifting liabilities to these companies isn't going to do anything except for shift it to bigger tech that can afford to absorb the legal and compliance costs and the litigation, or shift the activity to open source models, which is more dangerous. Most of that's coming out of Asia and other places, so we don't have the ability to regulate. So regulation is just the wrong tool to make an impact, and that's really one big part of our problem is we're over-regulated, we're too conservative with execution, and we're a little bit arrogant about being the best. If you look at the top 70 critical technology areas that have been tracked by researchers, the US, for instance, used to dominate 60 out of 70, round numbers, but now China dominates, and the US leads in only a few, and Europe's like way behind. And so if we're not careful, we may be in our last best years. We got to adopt that startup growth mindset again and have more hopefulness and optimism, maybe some good science fiction that doesn't paint the future as dystopian. And I think that's important.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Well, Kelvin, thank you so much for taking the time to join me on this show. This was such an insightful discussion. So to our audience, we're going to provide links to Kelvin's LinkedIn, to Neurometric's website and all of the content that I referred to on this session. So, Kevin, thank you again for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. Appreciate it.